And we'll start with something called the Amarna tablets, and this is a replica of one of the Amarna tablets, 285, I believe, one of the letters from the King of Jerusalem. And these are very interesting. 382 clay tablets written from the Canaanite city-states during the reign of Amenhotep III. So this is during the time of the biblical conquest or immediately after it, okay? So what they're doing in all of these letters, they're crying out to Pharaoh for help. We are being overrun, they said, by the Apiru, H-E-B-I-R-U, Hapiru. And of course, there are no vowels in these ancient letters, so we're talking consonants, the HBR.
Right.
So the HBR are overrunning our cities, and if you don't send help, we won't be able to pay tribute this year. Now that's very interesting, Gene, because we have the book of Joshua, we have the book of Judges, where we see something called the conquest. They are coming back into the land, and they're taking over these Canaanite city-states. Well, the Amarna letters show us that very same picture. For example, Labayu, who's king of Shechem, Abdihiba's king of Jerusalem, Labayu has completely allied himself with the Abiru. He has forsaken Pharaoh, and that's a dangerous thing to do. And Abdihiba over here in Jerusalem is saying, I'm the only one who hasn't defected to the Abiru. You better send help now and get me out of here, or I'm going to be a dead man. That's the type of background stuff that we're talking about. Am I excavating a site that's mentioned in the Amarna letters? And so, for example, Amarna 288, which is a letter that I'm publishing right now, mentions a site called Silu, which I believe is Shiloh. And so the clues then, we take the biblical text, something like the Amarna letters, then the archaeological record, we triangulate, and then we publish.
All right, so I know people are looking at this going, what, it sounds like you're holding a piece of charcoal, that you buy at the store. So this was actually clay, and then they actually make the letters out into that.
So though it's a cuneiform script and an ancient Akkadian. So Akkadian is the diplomatic language of the late Bronze Age, and there are tens of thousands of these that have been found around the ancient Near East. So these were never answered, incidentally. These were all written to Pharaoh. They were found at Akhenaten's new headquarters in Egypt. When he became a monotheist, he moved the capital down to Akhenaten. That's where they were found by a peasant woman there accidentally. They were never answered. Like, why would Pharaoh not answer this? And I'm just thinking, well, if you just lost your military and you just lost your labor force and you encountered a series of natural disasters, including the death of the firstborn and the death of the cattle, you might be unable to rescue these. You're really losing your colonies. It's equivalent to Great Britain losing the colonies in the American Revolution.
You said a lady stumbled on it. How did she find them?
She was digging for fertilizer for her garden and began to dig up clay tablets. She realized they might have some value, and of course they did.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. All right, what else have you got over here? You've got...
well, here's a look at what a Dead Sea Scroll would look like. This is the Moses Scroll from what many believe are called the Shapira texts, which is still something being debated whether this is legitimate or not, because this was found even before the Dead Sea Scrolls in 1947 began to come to light.
And where was this found?
Well, the Shapira document, we don't know exactly where it came from because it came off the antiquities market, but they claimed that it came from caves down near the Dead Sea, which is where, of course, the Qumran literature came from. Now, the Dead Sea Scrolls were enormously important for textual studies because, again, we were being told the Bible was written by men, it was copied over and over and over again. Errors have crept into the manuscripts. This was the criticism. Well, with the finding of the Dead Sea Scrolls, we found that this simply was not the case. Here we had all the biblical manuscripts except Esther, and we probably have a fragment of Nehemiah. Then there was sectarian literature like the War Scroll, the Rule of the Community, and so forth. Then there are commentaries on Scripture.
Right.
Okay? And then there's like pseudepigraphal literature, which is typical of the late Second Temple period. So this entire library, and it's so dry by the Dead Sea it had survived. When you took those biblical manuscripts, like take Isaiah, the 4 books, incidentally, mentioned that were most commonly found at Qumran are the same 4 books that the New Testament writers most often quoted from. So when you've got New Testament writers quoting Scripture, it's Isaiah, Psalms, Deuteronomy, and Genesis. Those are the top 4. Those are the most manuscripts found at Qumran were also from those 4 books, interestingly.
And what is this particular one?
This was what was called the Moses Scroll, and a dealer, a scholar actually by the name of Shapira, translated this. Unfortunately, we have nothing surviving of it now except sort of squeezes and writings about
Is this
it.
like Deuteronomy somewhere, or is it?
I'm not positive. I don't want to misspeak on that. But he was ultimately claimed to be a forger. In the end, it ruined the man's reputation. But now modern scholars have gone back and said, wait a minute, maybe not so fast. And for example, you're located where we're sitting today is not far from Fort Worth. And Southwest Baptist Theological Seminary here in Fort Worth a few years ago purchased some Dead Sea Scroll fragments from the Kando family, the original family that had found the Dead Sea Scrolls. And these were later, paid a lot of money for them, these were later claimed to be forgeries. Well, now, it's interesting how pendulums swing, and we can all sort of get on board. Well, now scholars, Dead Sea Scroll scholars in particular, are going back and saying, now, wait a minute, what are you basing that claim on? And it's pretty flimsy. You're saying, well, the ink goes over salt on all these, if you have leather, it dries out really fast by the Dead Sea. Everything by the Dead Sea is going to have salt fragments on it, okay, including leather. And so they're saying, well, it's going over the salt fragments, and so it's evidence of a modern forgery. But wait a minute, did you go back and check the other Dead Sea Scrolls to see if we have the same thing? Now we've done that, you do have the same thing. You have ink that's going over cracks, and they claim that's evidence of forgery. Well, we have the exact same thing in the other scrolls. So it's, we kind of want to keep our powder dry when we're calling something a forgery, but I think right now the jury's still out on the Shapira scroll. The big benefit for us is that we were able to take, say, the Isaiah scroll, and people had said there's no way that was written at the time because those messianic prophecies had to be Christian interpolations, okay? They're too specific. Well, here we had from 200 BC, this Isaiah scroll, and it had not changed from the text that we had today.
Well, that in itself is miraculous. That you can't pass one story down to a couple generations without it changing.
Right. Now, this is not to say that there aren't some dots and tittles, and I'll give you a good example. Psalm 145 in the English translation. We've always struggled with that because it's what we call an acrostic psalm. So it's all the letters of the alphabet. Say in English, we'd be going like A, all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. B, believe in the Lord Jesus Christ and you will be saved. So you'd have a verse with each letter of the alphabet. So we have several acrostic psalms. That's what Psalm 145 is. Well, verse 13 was missing. Right. So the N in the acrostic psalm was missing. Well, they didn't skip in, it's just that the manuscripts have probably been damaged over time. You go to the Dead Sea Scrolls, you find the Psalm scroll, there's Psalm 145, and there's your missing verse. Just like we knew it had to have been all along. So we're actually able to recover some of the biblical texts that had been lost. So we're not saying that there aren't any emendations or changes, but we're saying that the thrust of the message is overwhelmingly consistent.
Wow, that's amazing. All right, the Misha Stella.
Well, the Misha Stella is a fascinating work. You have King Misha, he's a Moabite king, and here you have a very early mention of Israel, just like you have in the Moabite stone. Moabite stone, Misha Stella is the same thing, used interchangeably. So very, very fascinating. Maybe the most interesting one is the House of David inscription. Prior to 1993, we had scholars called minimalists from Copenhagen, Denmark. I was recently there speaking at an archaeology conference. These are the guys who proclaim that biblical archaeology is dead. So I was invited to speak there recently, and I was able to demonstrate that we are quite not dead. The discipline is very well. Their school of thought, minimalism at the University of Copenhagen, is now dead. Right. They spread like wildfire, and they told everybody David is not mentioned anywhere outside the Bible. So you've got it in the Bible. You don't mean to tell me killing giants. I mean, this is like Greek mythology. This is what they told us. Well, lo and behold, in 1993, in Dan, in northern Israel, Abraham Biran and his team uncover this inscription in secondary usage from Hazael, king of Damascus. and it refers to, it's only about 50 years or so, maybe 2 generations after David's time, and it refers to the house of David and the kingdom of David. Kingdom of David.
Wow.
Okay?
There you go.
So there you get your first mention. Since then, we now have 3 other mentions of David outside the Bible. So since 1993, 4 mentions of David, and even his palace has been excavated in Jerusalem. So did anyone apologize? Right. Did anyone admit they were wrong?
No.
No, they moved on to the next accusation. Right. Okay, so which is fine, but I think we need to remember this: that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Okay,
that's good. All right, Shatsu of Yahweh.
The land of the Shatsu of Yahweh. So this is an inscription from the Solib hieroglyph down in Egypt, dates to the reign of Amenhotep III, and so you're talking 1370 BC. So very, very early. And those who believe that the Israelites didn't even exit from Egypt until much, much later, if they even believe that there was an exodus, this is very problematic. Because here, Amenhotep III refers to the land of the Shatsu, which are nomads, of Yahweh, or Yahweh, which means in 1370 there's already a land where people worship Yahweh. Well, guess what? The Israelites have just exited from Egypt, according to the biblical chronology. Right. They've just arrived in the Promised Land, and so here you've got a reference in Egypt to a land where people are worshiping Yahweh. That's what we call a synchronism between the historical data and the biblical data.
All right, so Proto-Sinaitica, tell me about that.
We have a place called Serabet el-Hadim in the Sinai. These are turquoise mines, and out of these turquoise mines, we have a number of Proto-Sinaitic inscriptions. And so this is, sometimes it's called Proto-Canaanite, Proto-Sinaitic, because we find them in the Sinai. But no one's had the guts to call it Proto-Hebrew, which is in fact what it is. Here's what's happening. When I was in school, I was being taught that the alphabet came from Mesopotamia, that the Phoenicians developed this and it came to us. No one believes that anymore, okay? So we now all believe that the alphabet actually came to us from Egypt. So these Middle Egyptian hieroglyphs, and there's hundreds of them. If Moses was trying to write the Pentateuch in Middle Egyptian, which he certainly would have known Middle Egyptian, you would have needed a library to carry it around, 700 different symbols, okay, instead of 22. You take, say, the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, the Aleph, an ox head, and it's morphing into an Aleph. So that symbol is now going to carry a phonetic sound with it. Right. So what we see in the Sinai is the emergence of the first alphabet. And I think we can argue that that very well may be Hebrew. Now, it's not that the Hebrews are the only one using it, because people of different cultures use the same alphabet, okay? Sure. But were they actually Hebrews responsible for it? Were the Hebrews the one taking the Egyptian hieroglyphs and then giving sound quality to them? I think there's a strong argument to be made for that. And the inscription that we found on Mount Ebal, which we touched on last week, was actually in that same type of what I would call a proto-alphabetic script. And think of it this way. I have a master's degree in English also, and so I've studied the development in the English language. We have Old English, which is like Caedmon's Hymn and Beowulf. If you were to look at it on page, you'd only pick out a few words here or there. That's Old English. Then we have Middle English, like Chaucer's English. You would recognize most of that. And then we have Modern English, of course. And then we have Texan, of course, which may be a whole other thing. But yeah, various versions of English. My point being, you have the same development in Hebrew. So we have Paleo-Hebrew, which is biblical Hebrew. Right. Okay, this is Paleo-Hebrew, okay? Yes. Right here. But there's an ancestor or a predecessor of that, and that's not Paleo-Hebrew, it's Proto-Alphabetic Hebrew. Okay. Equivalent to Old English, if you will. That's what those Proto-Sinaitic inscriptions are.
Wow. All right, so you got some coins here. Explain to us what you have here.
Well, coins are always interesting. We excavate... for example, at Khirbet el-Maqadir, we had 1,322 coins that we excavated. At Shiloh, we've excavated about 400 or 500 so far. The coins are very instructive. They begin in about the 5th century BC, and prior to that time, there are no coins. So if you were going to tithe, for example, when you went to the tabernacle, just how do you do that?
Yeah.
Because you can't go to tabernacle.org and make a secure online donation. You can't write a check. There's no coins. There's no cash. You're going to bring commodity, bushels and barrels and so forth that you're going to bring. But once coinage is developed, this changes things. And this gives us more historicity. Every ruler mentioned in the New Testament, Festus, Felix, Pontius Pilate, Herod, Agrippa, everyone that is named, we have found their coins. Every single, even the bad guys, okay? Antiochus Epiphanes and all these guys, they were real people. So Gene, the Bible is talking about real people, real places, real events, and we see it in the coins. A lot of people may not know this, but maybe another topic for another time, but the authenticity of the Shroud of Turin. This is something that a lot of people came out and said, well, it can't possibly be, it's too good to be true, but wait a minute, maybe it actually is. And the more that I have personally studied this, I have learned a lot about it. In fact, I was brought into a Shroud of Turin project a few years ago. Many people don't know that there's a coin in the eye of this crucifixion victim. So there's no doubt that it's a crucifixion victim.
Right.
Okay. Now, is it Jesus of Nazareth? I think it probably is, but we can't prove that. But it's clearly a first century crucifixion victim, and they put coins in the eye sockets. This was burial custom at the time, and of all coins to choose, the coin of Pontius Pilate. How would a medieval forger ever have been able to make that connection? Wow. So the coins are phenomenal.